Capcom has recently announced the highly anticipated Resident Evil Code Veronica remake, now simply titled Resident Evil Veronica, and it didn't take long for fans to revisit the age-old argument that Code Veronica is the true Resident Evil 3, with many believing that Resident Evil 3 serves no purpose in the mainline canon, while Code Veronica is just extremely important to the storyline. But here's the truth that they don't want to admit. Resident Evil 3 is a direct sequel to Resident Evil 1, and Resident Evil 2 is a side story that exists within the events of Resident Evil 3. Not only does it complete Jill's story arc, which sets her up to join Chris in Europe as well as the BSAA and the events of Resident Evil 5, but it also closes the door on the Raccoon City saga, allowing the audience to focus on the original narrative of Code Veronica, which even in its original design when it was planned to be Resident Evil 3, was just going to move away from the Raccoon City saga without any meaningful resolution to that story. It's common knowledge by this point that Code Veronica sets up the events of Resident Evil 5, but the events of Code Veronica are rarely ever mentioned outside of Code Veronica. I mean, let's be honest, Code Veronica's biggest contribution to the series was the T Veronica virus that Carla later modified and used to create the C virus in Resident Evil 6. And everybody hated that game, unlike Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, which introduced the destruction of Raccoon City, which has been further explored in Resident Evil 9, you're welcome. Not to mention Resident Evil Outbreak, Resident Evil Degeneration, and Resident Evil Survivor. I mean, it's time to face facts. The Ashford family have no real significance outside of Code Veronica. Yes, it was revealed in the game that Wesker survived the events of RE1, which is a huge deal, and it also reintroduces Chris to the series while closing out Claire's story arc from Resident Evil 2. But that's all it does. That whole game is just one glorified high school reunion. Truthfully, you didn't need a whole game to set up the rivalry between Chris and Wesker. Obviously, Chris is going to be pissed off at Wesker given the events of Resident Evil 1. Not to mention the shenanigans Wesker pulls in Resident Evil 5 kinda trumps the events of Code Veronica. I keep hearing about how important Code Veronica is to the overall story and how players going on to 4 and 5 would be totally confused without it. But I have to disagree because again, 4 and 5 do a great job of telling their own story. They don't reference back to Code Veronica. I mean, let's just pretend Code Veronica doesn't exist. Wesker is reintroduced in Resident Evil 4 anyway, and the exposition in Resident Evil 5 with Wesker ambushing Chris and Jill on a mission, and what happens on that mission, is a much better motive for Chris's rage than anything introduced in Code Veronica. Not to mention, if Code Veronica didn't exist, you might not have Resident Evil 6, which I think most fans would consider a win. So really, why does Code Veronica even exist? It's a Claire standalone game that needs Chris and Wesker to help carry the narrative over the finish line, while the main takeaway, the T Veronica virus, is suffocated by reunions, rivalries, and Steve Burnside wasting ungodly amounts of ammunition while he screams, "Father!" in the background.